Melbourne's population grew from 3.85 million to 5.19 million. That's a whopping 34% increase on population. In 2013 and 2014, the government sector invested about $8 billion in infrastructure projects. Property is a long-term investment. I don't look at a 5-year window of strong growth for 5 to 6 years. I'm looking for a market that's going to have long sustainable growth, but hold the property for 20 plus years, because that's how you make your wealth in property. Not holding it for 5 years and selling it. I don't look at that. I'm looking at holding the properties for as long as I can. But what do all these places have in common? You know, your Wagga Waggas, even your Brisbanes, even your Toowoomba's. They've got billions of dollars in infrastructure projects, okay? And it's very diverse. What's that going to do? It's going to create a lot of jobs, okay? And with a lot of jobs, what does that do? It increases the population. So the population starts to grow. Not just that, what starts to happen is the GDP starts to increase.
We believe every Australian deserves a right to own at the very least 5 investment properties. I'm Adrian Trimboli.
And I'm Frank Ambesi, and welcome to the Invest in You podcast.
We can listen to our family members or influencers online or TV programs, but who really knows this answer? Frank, the answer to the myth that I say hasn't been solved, I think we're going to solve it in today's quick podcast. And the question that thousands and thousands of people have asked us as a company, and today I'd like to shed some light on this topic. Hopefully, this gives you guys, the listeners and the viewers, a clear-cut, data-driven answer, which you've been searching for. And ultimately, we want to try and debunk the which is the better performer, regional versus capital cities.
So if you're listening to this podcast, I know you're emotionally intelligent, I know you're open-minded, and you have the initiative to go out there and do your own research before even listening to me or any other people out there. Okay. So today I want to talk about these two type of, regions that you got capital cities versus regional towns. Okay. Mm-hmm. And debunk the myth that we're all being told, lied to. Okay. We hear quotes from our parents, from our parents, other people as well, since we're toddlers or teenagers. Money is the root of all evil. Money doesn't grow on trees. Wear a jumper and when you go outside because you're going to get a cold. All these stories are complete lies. And so in the Bible, you know what it states? It states the love of money is the root of all evil. Now, if you work and you go to work, you get up every day and you go to work, you're working getting paid. So are you loving money? No, you use it because you need to survive. So when people say these things, I think to themselves, are you just saying it because someone else has said it? Or is it the truth of what you actually truly believe? Secondly, money is printed every single day. Okay. There's an abundance of money. They've been doing this for centuries. Okay. How do you think money is created? It's created by debt. Going to the bank, getting a home loan, that there is creating money. So there is infinite money in the world. And then lastly, people say, don't go outside if it's cold without a jumper, or make sure you put your shoes and socks on and don't wear shorts, all these sort of things. But people have ice baths every day. People have cold showers every day. I'm one of those top people. Adrian, you're one of those people. You've got an ice bath. You are one of those people, and you do it every day. You do it in winter and you do it in summer. You don't get sick.
Sometimes, but not because of ice baths.
Correct. So these are the stories that people say, and these stories, sometimes you take it for a grain of salt, because once again, is there any weight behind them if there's no evidence?
That's where you're going with that. Okay, now I'm with you. I was kind of lost as to where you're going with that, Frank, but gotcha. So you're questioning, gotcha. Please go on. I got a little bit lost there, but I'm with you now.
No, that's fine. And I think I want to talk about, and this is a little bit kind of a story that a client reached out to me yesterday. Mm-hmm. And this is a clear example of what's going on out in the news at the moment. They want to get rid of the 50% capital gains tax and get rid of it. The Greens want to destroy it. Okay. So if you're a property investor and you own the property for 1 year and you want to sell it and it's in your personal name, you got the 50% capital gains tax. So let's say you own the property and you've made 200 grand of equity because it's grown by 200 grand. You're going to pay 50% of that of capital gains. So you got 100 grand, you're going to pay 50% of that to capital gains. And depending on how much money you make and all that sort of stuff, you're going to pay tax on that at a certain rate. And he's messaged me and he goes, Frank, do you think this is going to disturb the market? What's your thought on this? Should I keep investing? And he's asked me all these questions. And I just asked him a question. I go, Eric, if this gets passed, are you going to stop investing and put everything on hold, not build wealth for you and your family? You're going to sit back and say, no, I'm not going to invest anymore because this has happened? Or are you going to continue to invest? And he sat there and he looked at me and he goes, you know what, Frank? Great point. Don't worry about this. And just went on with his day. So this is a clear example. Who cares about if they incorporate this rule? Who cares if they get rid of stamp duty and increase land tax? As an investor, are you going to stop investing because of these things, or are you going to continue investing regardless of what happens?
I know my answer. I think people's response to that will be, well, it will skew potentially the way they do invest, or they may skew the asset class that they do invest in. But what's this got to do with regional versus capital cities, Frank? I want to get into the nitty gritty.
Let's get into it. Okay, so
I
get a lot of people. Sorry, go for it.
I'm getting sick of your yapper. Let's get into the data.
Well, let's get into it. Okay, there's a lot of people that come to me. They go, I want to purchase in a capital city because of long sustainable capital growth. The great question, long sustainable capital growth. I love hearing that. And then when they say, I want to invest in Brisbane, I say to them, okay, that's fine. And I never try to deter anyone from investing anywhere, but I challenge people.
Yep. Because
we look at data, we look at what's going on in the market. Okay. I don't invest in emotion, and I don't invest by following the crowd. Mm-hmm. I say, that's fine. I go, but what happened in 2012 to 2019 in Brisbane? Because in 2012, the median house price was $435,000. Do you want to guess, Adrian, by 2019, do you know what the median house price was in Brisbane?
Only because I know my numbers. I would imagine it was, how much did you say it was in 2012?
435,000.
550? 600? 550?
493,000. It grew by 13% in the space of 7 years. And this information is from CoreLogic, which the banks use as their data reference, and majority of people out there when they're doing their property analysis.
493,000. Yeah, okay. Well, that's a very good point. Okay, keep going. I'm following now.
So do you know what Melbourne grew by from 2012 to 2019?
Astronomical growth.
Okay. So Melbourne grew from 485,000 to 666,000. So it was about 37% capital growth. Sydney grew by 51% during that time also. But if we look at the inner suburbs, of course, when we look in Melbourne, places like Brunswick grew by 54%. Places like Merrickvale, Maverickvale in Sydney grew by 74% during that time as well. So the question is, where is the next hotspot in Australia? And why did Melbourne outperform Brisbane?
If you're asking me the question, well, there's always a number of things. One of the big things is it's their period in that cycle. Like right now, BWA is the leader. South Australia is the leader. But there's a bunch of other things, population growth and what's actually going on in the economy. Are people moving there, not moving there? I don't know if you are asking me. I don't know if you'd like to actually shed some real data on this, please, if you could.
Yeah, I think during that time, during 2012 to 2019 in Melbourne's population grew from 3.85 million to 5.19 million. That's a whopping 34% increase on population.
That's huge.
In 2013 to 2014, the government sector invested about $8 billion in infrastructure projects. Okay, this is not including the private sector, and this is not including other outer source investments from people from other countries. Okay, now during this time as well, there was a 418% job growth increase through these sectors, okay, from the commercial space, okay, from the healthcare, educational, public admin, and the professional space, transport and warehousing, and the list goes on. So that gave a lot of opportunities to a lot of Australians. It attracted a lot of people. Population growth increased. Billions and billions of dollars was invested. Okay, there was an undersupply of property during that time. And that's why the property market grew to what it grew to in Melbourne and in Sydney during those times.
So it's because of those fundamentals. And this is the thing that we do harp on quite a bit, because it's really hard to pick that, right? It's kind of easy to just be like, we'll just invest in Melbourne. If you look at 2019, which I'm sure, Frank, you're probably going to touch on, 2019 to now 2024, Melbourne's gone like this. If you look at all those things that you've also mentioned, a few of those things are still happening. There's still, money being pumped into the economy, right? Because it's still a huge economy. But I'd imagine that the population growth is nowhere near that. If in fact it's probably the other way around. People are moving from droves out of here. So it's interesting. It's interesting facts. Okay, what else have you got for me?
So I guess people might be listening to this and they might be living in Melbourne and Sydney. And you might be saying, you know what, it did grow more than what you're saying, Frank, more than 50% or more in Melbourne and Sydney. That's correct. Of course, it's in the suburbs in Melbourne and Sydney. Some of them tripled during that time in value, okay? But I want to shed light on this because no one was investing in Adelaide, Perth, Brisbane from 2012 to 2019. 2019, I purchased a property in Brisbane, paid $300,000 for the property. Today, the property is worth $650. The rents have gone from $360 per a week. Now my rent is $500 per week. So I don't invest in Brisbane anymore. Regardless, I didn't invest in Brisbane last year or the year before that, personally, because I like to catch the market at the very beginning, at the bottom of its growth rate. Okay. Now I'm not saying Brisbane isn't going to grow anymore, but I have a strategy that I feel that works well for not just me, but for my clients as well. But let's get into it, okay? I want to wind back a clock, okay? Wind back the clock because why I'm doing this is because property growth rates are cyclical. Everything happens time and time again. So I want to go back from 2002 to 2008. Why I want to go back to 2002 to 2008, there was a huge property boom in Australia, throughout the whole of Australia. There were places like Busselton, Perth, Toowoomba, Wagga Wagga that blew up. Okay, during that time, during those 6-year period, there were places that grew, not double-digit growth, triple-digit growth during that time. During that time, from 2002 to 2008, there were 2 locations that didn't get double-digit growth. Do you know what those locations were?
That didn't get double-digit growth or didn't get...
Sorry, didn't get triple-digit growth.
So most regions around the country got triple-digit growth from 2002 to 2008, and there were 2 regions that didn't. When you say regions, were they capital cities or were they...
Capital cities.
2002 to 2008. Melbourne and Sydney? Yeah, Melbourne and Sydney.
Melbourne and Sydney.
They were the worst performing. Yep.
Sydney grew by 26%. Melbourne grew by 66% in 6 years. And
6 years, what's that? 4%, give or take. Melbourne's still not bad. Still 10% plus a year.
Correct.
Okay.
But during that time, we had interest rates, go from 6.3% to 9.5%. From 2002 to 2008, there was 22 rate increases during that time.
Huge.
Do you want to hear some of the best performing markets during that time?
Well, to me, and to the naked eye, Melbourne seems like an excellent performing market. 66% in 6 years. That's a very, very good performing market. But surprise me. Go on.
Busselton. If anyone knows of Busselton, it's a regional town in WA. Grew by 202%. A place called Geraldton in WA, 199%. Jesus. We have Foster's Coast. We have grew by 176%. Townsville, 168%. Launceston, 166%. Perth was about 147%, and Hobart was about a 139%. So when you compare that with Melbourne and Sydney, where would you like to put your money? Would you like to put your money in Melbourne and Sydney just because it's the capital city, or in any of these other regions that grew well over 150% during that time?
And it's a fair point. again, I always try and put myself in the listener's point of view, and I say, well, hang on, if you bought that same property in Melbourne in 2002, today that property is going to be worth millions and millions and millions of dollars, right? Which is the truth, which is absolutely the truth. Whereas some of those regions that you mentioned before, some of those regions have gone down in value, maybe not worth millions of dollars. I mean, a place like Launceston, okay, that's gone absolutely bananas. So yeah, I guess talk me through that, because I absolutely agree that you would want to be putting your money in the regions that do have substantial growth, first 6 years. But is that substantial growth sustainable? Is that actually sustainable long-term growth? And that's probably the argument you're going to get on the back of this.
Correct. And that's why I want to paint a picture, but I want to talk about, and we go back to that, is, of course, there's markets. Some of those markets have gone down and trended sideways, but so has Melbourne and Sydney. If we go back to the 1991 onwards, Melbourne lost 30% in its property market. Okay, we didn't talk about that. No one talked about that. But during that time, Perth and Brisbane were on fire from 1991 to about 1996. So everything is cyclical, okay? And markets go up and down. If we look at from after COVID, what happened with Melbourne and Sydney? Started to slow down. So would you like to put your money there and say, you know what, I want to invest my money there? Or could have you invested in maybe Adelaide, Brisbane, Perth, or even other regional towns that outperform the market? So before we get into that, let me just paint a picture, because I want to paint a picture. I think that this is going to open up your mind, and I'm going to show you the opportunity by using a strategy like this, how it can help 99% of Australian investors.
Gotcha.
Okay.
Yep.
So property is a long-term investment. I don't look at a 5-year window of strong growth for 5 to 6 years. Okay. So let's just throw that out the window. I'm looking for a market that's going to have long sustainable growth, but hold the property for 20 plus years, because that's how you make your wealth in property, not holding it for 5 years and selling it. I don't look at that. I'm looking at holding the properties for as long as I can. So I want to get 2 properties. Okay. And I want to go back to 2002 and go right forward to 2023. Okay. Now I'll go 1 property, a place called Coburg. It's 8 Ks north of Melbourne CBD. I grew up there. Okay. In a suburb right next to Brunswick. If anyone knows what Brunswick is. Okay. I looked at a property. There was a property that got sold for $461,000 in 2002.
Gotcha.
I got a property in Townsville during the same time, got sold in Townsville. And why I'm picking Townsville, because we're investing in Townsville. Okay. Full disclaimer. $120,000 that got sold for in 2002.
Same time. Perfect.
Same time. Okay. Now the Coburg property grew to 1.4 million. It got valued at today. Mm-hmm. The Townsville property, that same one, got valued at $580,000. Okay. Do you want to know what the return on investment is for each property, and which one do you think, Adrian, outperformed?
How much the Melbourne property get sold for? Sorry, mate, I've got bad memory.
So it got sold for $461,000. Now it's valued at 1.4 million.
Yeah, so that's a 3x ultimately, whereas the 120 and the 580 is almost a 4 to 5x, which I already know the complaint that's going to come there. But anyway, throw it at me. Come on. I always try. Sorry, go on.
So the return on investment for the Coburg property was a 201%.
Yep.
And the Townsville property was 383%.
Huge.
Now, of course, the Townsville property is not going to give you financial freedom, and so is the property in Coburg. It's not going to give you financial freedom. But this is where I'm going with this. Okay. To buy that Melbourne property for 10% deposit, you need $46,000. To buy the Townsville property, you need $12,000.
Plus,
okay, big difference.
And whatnot.
Yeah, but let's just look at this. During that time, 2002, the median rent in Coburg was $250 per week, which was a 2.8% rental yield. Okay, by 2008, the rents went up to $350 per week. Okay, which made the property 4% rental yield by 2008 in Coburg. Okay, now with that deposit of $46,000 plus you got your costs, but let's just look at this. Let's just use a deposit for example. You could have bought 4 properties in Townsville for $120,000 with that $46,000 roughly, if not probably an extra $2,000 for just so $48,000, because of course $112,000 for a deposit for a property, you could have got 4 properties out of that. Townsville during that time, 2002, the median rent was $184 per week, which is a 6% rental yield.
More than triple.
By 2008, the rent went to $350 per week. turning that property into a 15% rental yield. So by 2008, you had the Coburg property rental yield at 4%, and you had the Townsville property at 15%. Imagine if you bought 4 properties. By that time, you've got a 15% rental yield on each property. Let's say you own those properties to today. Okay, to today. Okay, they'll be valued at $580,000 roughly. That is a 4,733% in 20 years. And your asset values were valued at $2.3 million. You've also got cash flow, more cash flow than just having one property in Coburg. And even if you bought another one, you probably would have been, hitting your maximum borrowing capacity, because once again, $461,000 in 2002 was a lot of money.
Yep. I mean, if anyone sold a 15% rental yielding property, which has already doubled in value or quadrupled in value, I'd be shaking my head and saying, what are you doing? That property would literally pay itself off over a 10-ish year period by itself without you putting money. Okay. All right. Now I'm with you. I'm with you on that, right? That makes good sense, and that clears it up, at least for me, right? Because ultimately, at the end of the day, no one really gives, like, percent returns are great, but if one thing pops out at $1 million extra than the Townsville property, a lot of people are going to think, well, just make it simple, do it right where you live and just buy that. You've just clearly identified that. My problem with this is that's now over 20 years ago. It's over 20 years ago, and obviously today in 2023, some of the information doesn't really relate to 99% of the people. It also doesn't really guide them into where to go or what to do. So do you have anything that you can touch on in regards to like today's property market or something kind of similar? Because there'd be a lot of people thinking the exact same thing.
So like I said before, okay, property is long-term. So if you're looking to make money as short-term, you're never going to, outperform the market, because property is a long-term game.
Yep.
But I know where you're coming from. So if we just have a look in the last 5 years, what's going on in Australia? We'll look at some regional towns, we'll look at some capital cities towns, and then I'll kind of touch on some other things here so people can get to understand where I'm coming from. So there have been some markets that we've seen over, 50% growth in the last 5 years, okay? We can say there have been some really, really strong capital cities that are outperforming the market, outperforming some regional towns. Yes, correct. And vice versa. So let's just have a look from 2019 to 2023. Melbourne grew 20%. Okay, since then. Since 2000, if we look at the median house price from 2019 to 2023, it's grown 20%. Sydney, 51%. Brisbane, 82%. Adelaide, 86%. And then if we look at South Perth, 45%. Okay. But when we take a look at regional towns, the data tells me a different thing. Wagga Wagga grew 95% during that time. Bundaberg, 97%. Toowoomba, 80%, Launceston, 75%. And we're invested in all these regions.
This is over the last 5 years, you're saying?
Correct.
It almost sounds like you're calling out a Brownlow. Launceston, 5%. Very nice. Okay, so these are the last 5 years. That's drastically different.
And all of these property markets, if we go back 5 years ago, even go back 3 years ago, you could buy a property for $400,000 or under $400,000 with your eyes closed. Okay. So if we go back 5 years ago, or let's say 3 years ago, let's go back 3 years ago, in Melbourne and Sydney, you're not going to buy a property for $400,000. I'm talking about a freestanding house. Yep. Potentially, you could have maybe in Brisbane and Adelaide and Perth, of course. Okay. But I would have rather put my money in Perth and Adelaide than put my money in Sydney and Melbourne. But let's go back. I would rather put my money in Toowoomba, Wagga Wagga, Bundaberg, Launceston over Perth, Adelaide, and Brisbane, even though I've got property in Brisbane, because those markets have outperformed those capital cities. So when I look at someone's situation, I'm looking at purchase price. I'm looking at their personal income. I'm looking at affordability. I'm looking at how to scale a property portfolio. Because one property, regardless if it's worth 1 million or 2 million, or if your property portfolio is worth, around that price point, still, if it's not paid off debt, you're not going to become wealthy. So there's an art of scaling your portfolios, having properties, be able to pay for themselves, Okay. And then, of course, down the track, when interest rates start to come down, your properties are starting to look at a positive cash flow. And there's a strategy of different ways of how we can structure it to get to your goal as fast as possible. But if you go down the route and you're buying these sort of properties with shocking yields, high capital growth, and you're thinking, oh, yeah, it's capital growth, it's going to make me rich. Once you max out, you can't do anything. So I don't want to go on a tangent here, but I'm very passionate about this because I don't look at a region and go, I'm anti capital cities. No, I'm looking at to debunk what people are saying out there and challenge them and say, okay, if you really think that, that's okay. But let's have a look at the data. Let's have a look what's going on. And let me educate you, because it's all about education. Because I could be robbing you from success, or someone else could. And so out there, we hear all this noise, and all this noise is just garbage some of the times that we hear. And you can challenge me on this. You want to call me out? Call me out. But all this data here is from CoreLogic. All this data is 100% accurate. It's nothing that I've just made up off the top of my head. And I want to educate people, because sometimes going into a capital city and buying a property at 600 right now, say in Brisbane or in Perth, and you're someone starting out to invest, it might not be the right situation or the right property for you at that point in time.
And most importantly, there are other options. There are other options. I like that 5-year window of what's actually occurred in the last 5 years. That paints a good picture. Again, the same thought, because it's fear, right? Why would people choose a capital city over a regional town? Because, I mean, one, capital cities are seen to be better performing, right? That's the common thread. Seen to be safer investments. That's the common thread. But because of that, because of the fear is brought to you by lack of knowledge a lot of the times. So I think you've done a really, really good job here in just identifying what's right, what's wrong. Again, we are not against capital cities. I've got properties in capital cities. I've got properties in regional towns. And so do you. So, okay, cool. Did you want to touch on anything else, Frank?
Lastly, I'll touch on, I guess, what do all these places have in common? Your Wagga Waggas, even your Brisbanes, even your Toowoomba's. They've got billions of dollars of infrastructure projects, okay? And it's very diverse. So that there is, what's that going to do? It's going to create a lot of jobs, okay? And if a lot of jobs, what does that do? It increases the population. So the population starts to grow. Not just that, what starts to happen is the GDP starts to increase. And what is the GDP? It's a gross domestic product. And why I look at that for a region is because a region is like a business. If you're going to buy or invest in a business, you want your business to profit to go up. You want it to be profitable. Mm-hmm. You don't want the GDP to go trending down. So it's the same thing when I'm looking at a region. I want to make sure the industries are increasing in value and the GDP is increasing in value. Not just that, it diversifies the economy even more. So if we look at places like Perth that people go, oh, it's going to, lose value in the next 5 years after this growth rate. No, it's not. And why I'm saying that, or, I don't have a crystal ball and I can't say, no, it's not. That's the wrong word to use. But what I'm looking at is the economy has changed dramatically. The Premier has changed that economy dramatically, and they've tried to change, and they've done a fantastic job doing that. And they increased other industries to make sure so it's not relying on the mining sector. So that's a very important thing. Then there's been private investments in these areas. There's been very low building approvals as well, which creates one thing, low supply. When there's low supply, what happens? It creates more demand, and then demand gets higher and higher. And then lastly, the government and the council area have a strategy plan in place. You can find this on their websites. They have an active plan in place. Once again, a council or local government area and a government, they're not just the government. They are a business. They're trying to improve the area. People forget about this. Okay, people forget about that. And this list can go on and on and on why I look at these investments. But the point of this whole thing is that property is a long-term investment. Regionals can outperform capital cities and vice versa. Okay, regional towns have some pretty good cash flow, and you can get some really good rental yields in some of these areas as well, which is going to help because rental yields is quite important. Okay, there is no such thing as a stable market across the country. Every market goes up and down, up and down. Okay. Doesn't matter if the market is 2,000 kilometers away from the capital city or if it's in a capital city, it's going to go up and down. Okay. And interest rates do not affect the property market. Okay. If we have a look from 2002 to 2008, when markets grew over 150%, during that time, interest rates went from 6.3% to 9.5%, increased 22 times during that 6-year period. What happened to the property market? It went up. And so I want to educate people on this because it's going to help them and make them a better investor.
Very controversial, Frank. Very, very controversial. I want to, before we kind of wrap up the session, because I actually think it's been excellent, right? What you've just done there, Frank, is, so for every one of the viewers, right? Frank's role at Fresh Start is the head of research. So every single month, he needs to look into a new region. And just before this today, it's the 23rd of February as we're recording this week, he found a new region. He's now presented it to our buyers agents, and we are now going into that new region. What you just mentioned right then, billions of dollars of infrastructure spend, and the GDP is growing, and the diverse economy, and building approved, you've just listed out exactly what you do. So if you guys want to go back, pause that, and listen to all those things, go out and do this yourself. Full disclosure. It's going to take a long time, and it's going to take lots of reading and lots of data picking up. But you guys can literally run through that list. Now, there's a bunch of other things, of course, and it goes through a very long and boring and laborious process before you actually tick it off and you say, cool, not only are we going to buy for our clients, I'm going to put my own money in that portfolio, in that region. But I think that list that you've just brought out right there, along with all the other things that you've mentioned, the controversial things, I think it's super, super important that people understand that this is just a process. And in fact, it's actually a boring, pretty simple process, right? It's just you've got to know what you're doing, and exactly you've got to dedicate the time to actually looking into it. But I think that part right there, just before your controversial comments, was probably the most important part of this entire podcast.
Thank you. And I think, once again, like, I'm not here to knock capital cities or vice versa. I'm here to educate people, open up their mind, tell them the truth, by just looking at numbers, because numbers don't lie. 1 + 1 = 2, and give people, I guess, a different way to look at things. There is multiple ways, I guess, of doing one thing. It doesn't have to be one way that you've been taught or someone's told you on TV or heard online. There's multiple ways, but the results do speak for themselves too. Yep. So that's where I wanted to go with this. I wanted to educate people, and hopefully you did. I did. And if you like this, smash that like button, okay? Please smash that like button.
Subscribe. They need to be verified.
Because this here is information that we're trying to create, as much information similar to this, but even other things about strategy and things like that. So subscribe, and you'll get access to all our videos about property-related topics and other types of things, of getting other professionals in that are related to property also.
Most importantly, you will also be notified if you do subscribe. That is the benefit to you, not just to get our subscribe numbers up. Couldn't give a crap. Subscribe so you actually get notified as soon as you hear it. And it could actually be the reason why you may not invest in a region that only gets 25% growth as opposed to 100% growth. Regions we've just mentioned could save you or make you hundreds of thousands of dollars. So make sure you do subscribe. All right, Frank, thank you, sir. I appreciate it again. Time to get into work, brother.
We'll see you next week.
Bye-bye.